Okay, so let's start the Gemara. So I just want to start off by saying that today's broadcast is sponsored by Rav Mechi Wurzberger, a family. Legal Nishmas, his brother, whose yahrzeit was on Time Gedalia, was a boy b'yom, and his brother's name is Yosef Aryeh Alav Shalom Ben Yavad L'chaim Elazar Aaron Levi, in honor of the engagement of his son, Shmuli to Chanina Judas, and to be Mekayim the tzedakah portion of the triumvirate of Tshuva, Tefillah, and Tzedakah. Okay, so we are up to, yesterday we were discussing how if it rains on Yom Tov, no matter where that water was yesterday, it doesn't really matter whether it was on the ocean or whether it was in a cloud. It doesn't really matter because the water is never settled. It's always mobile, and therefore it would not have been koine shvisa before Yom Tov, and therefore when it rains and you capture it, it's going to be yours, and your radius will determine where this water could be. The Tanya, we learned in a brayso that supports this idea that Naharis Hamoishchen, flowing rivers, Umayanas Hanoivim, and flowing springs, Hare and Kiraglik Lodam, when you take water from them, even though you know the water traveled a far distance from the beginning of Shabbos till when you're drawing it from the water, we still consider that water connected to you, connected to the person who draws it, and wherever that person's allowed to go, that water's allowed to go. And you don't say that that water was koine shvisa before Shabbos or when Shabbos came, because the Svar of the Naidi, since the waters are moving around, it never is toif, it's never kovei its makom.
There's a klal in science that there's always the same amount of water in the world, no more, no less.
That's right. It changes space, it changes location.
Just in different forms and different places.
It's another zach is that there's a lot of rules, even chemical reactions. The same amount of atoms that are in the world from Bris Oilam are there now. New atoms are never created. It's just chemical changes to the distribution of them, and they become different molecules as different atoms connect to different places. Okay, so Dr. Haley Gemara back there. The morning of Mechi. Dr. Haley Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi, Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Today's a pretty simple Gemara. Amar Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi, Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi said over from Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Allah Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. So just to refresh our memories as to who Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri was, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri was the one in the Mishnah who said that if you're sleeping in the middle of nowhere, when Shabbos comes in, the fact that you could think you're still kaveh makom. We actually had a shaila in what Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri meant. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri mean that even an inanimate object can get a kviyas makom, to be koine shvisa, and since he's sleeping, we treat him like an inanimate object. There was another thought to say that maybe Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri would agree by an inanimate object. However, a human, since a human could think, and since if he was awake, he would be able to consciously be koine shvisa, even though he's sleeping, he could still be koine shvisa. And the Gemara seemed to have settled on the fact that Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri's psak was based on all inanimate objects can be koine shvisa. Now, just to clarify, in the case of the guy who fell asleep as Shabbos was starting, right? If he's koine shvisa, that will be a kula for him, because that will allow him to have a 2,000 amma radius. If he's not koine shvisa, he's stuck within his daled ammas. Let's look at the same shaila by Kalim. If a Kali is not koine shvisa, now whoever picks up that Kali could now use it wherever he has access to, which is a kula. While if the Kali was koine shvisa, then it's independent of me, and even if I take it, I cannot take it out of its own 2,000 amma radius. So this shaila by a human, paskin like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, will be a kula, but by a chayfetz, paskin like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, will in fact be a chomer. That's important to keep in mind. Omer le Reb Zeir le Reb Yaakov Bar Idi. You, Reb Yaakov Bar Idi, who quoted Reb Shua ben Levi, paskening like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, I have a question for you. Beferish Shmielach, did Reb Shua ben Levi directly address our Mishnah and pasken specifically like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, or is it possible you heard Rabbi Shua ben Levi say something else, do something else, paskin something else, and from that you figured out that he must paskin like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri? Omer Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi answered, Beferish Shmieli, I actually heard it beferish. But since you are questioning me and asking me if possibly I heard it from a diuk, did you have any diuk in mind? Is there anything that your Shub ben Levi ever said that you might think that you might consider my source? Zaktimar, my klala, the Amr Shub ben Levi, Allah kedivri hamekel be'er. Reb Shub Levi paskins that you always paskin like a mekel by Erev. And here we're paskining l'kul. So therefore, by definition, we should paskin like a B'rechin Benuri, who allows a person who was sleeping as Shabbos was coming in, he allows that person the full radius of 2,000 amas. Well, now that Reb Shub Levi said that, so then v'tata lamli, why does he need to say both halachas, halacha kedivri mekel, and halacha B'rechin Benuri, if he's paskining across the board like the Divrei Mekel, so then surely he would be passing like Rabbi Yechon Benuri. So why would Rabbi Shub ben Levi have to have expressed this twice? Amar Abzer Tzrichi, the Yash Minan, Halacha Rabbi Yechon Benuri. If all Rabbi Shub ben Levi would have said was that he passed like Rabbi Yechon Benuri, have Amina bein lekula bein lechumer. I would have thought tzai lekula and tzai lechumer. Like we said earlier, for a human it's a big kula, but for a object it's a chumer because now I cannot take it wherever I want. So what Rabbi Shub ben Levi is saying, although I pass like Rabbi Yechon ben Nuri, that this fellow who woke up after Shabbos came in could go 2,000 amas in every direction, I disagree with Rabbi Yechon ben Nuri when it comes to a chayfetz that was in a place, a chayfetz or hefker that was in a place, and there it's not kodesh visa, rather there whoever picks up the chayfetz can take that chayfetz wherever he's allowed to go. If that's the case, then all Rabbi Shub ben Levi should have said is that we always paskin like the mekel ba'erev and not make any mention of specifically paskining like Rabbi Yechon ben Benuri. Halacha Rabbi Yechon ben Benuri lamali. So more istrich. So gedayt chamina hanimili yochid b'makom yochid or rab b'makom rab. If Rabbi Shub ben Levi would have just said halacha kedivra mekel, that's if all else is equal. If a yochid is arguing with a yochid, or if a rabbim is arguing with a rabbim, there I'll say go like a mekel. But what if Aval Yochid b'makam Rabbim? What if the Yochid is mekel and the Rabbim is machmer? Like in our case, where Rabbi Yechon ben Nuri is a Yochid and the Chachamim are a Rabbim. Eimoloi, I would have thought that you would not be mekel, and that's why Rabbi Shub ben Levi felt the need to specify that he's paskening like Rabbi Yechon ben Nuri. Zog to Gemara. Amalei Rabbi Labai. Rabbi asked about it. I don't understand. Michti. Eruvin derabanan. If Eruvin is derabanan, and that's where you're going, Yukula, Mali Yachid b'Makom Yachid, Mali Yachid b'Makom Rabbim. Why would I think that Rabbi Shub ben Levi would not have passed like Rabbi Yechon ben Nuri L'Kula because he's arguing with a rabbim? Where do you see that there's such a distinction? And therefore, Rava says, why did Rabbi Shub ben Levi have to specify that like Rabbi Yechon ben Nuri? I would have known it anyway from the fact that he said that by Erev you go lahakam. Is that so true? Are you actually telling me that by a Drabanan you'll always be mekel, even though a Yochid who's being mekel might be arguing with a rabbin who's being machmer? Are you so sure about that? But now we learned, and we know the halach is there are women, all women. The Gemara Nida starts off with if they're pierced and nida, any taharis that they touched for the last 24 hours would be tummy. Or if they were boidik, it's a shaila in the Mishnah how far back they would be metamataris, because if they saw nida now, they might have had it even earlier. They just noticed it now. So therefore, anything that they touched in the past for a certain period of time, let's say up to 24 hours before, would be tummy. The question is, there are some women who it's not their derech to see dam. A yeledis doesn't normally see dam. As a kena doesn't see dam. A ketana doesn't see dam. Those women, we say daya shaitan, meaning we don't assume they see dam. If they see dam, then they're only tame and they're only metama things. We don't backdate their tumah. Rabbi Lazar had a chiddush. He said, "Kol isha she'avu aleh shalosh einais." Any woman who 3 periods, meaning 30 days, 3 sets of 30 days, or 90 days. Any woman who for 90 days, even if she's young in her childbearing years, But if for 90 days she doesn't see dam, we say that this woman no longer has the derech to see dam, and dayashaita, we will say that we only matama her from the time that she sees dam and not prior to it. So Rabbi Eliezer was a big kula. He was a yachid who was mekel. Everybody else said it's not enough for a woman to miss 3 oinis. She also has to be in the category of women who normally don't see, such as a yeledes, a meuberes, a zakena. But stama lady who doesn't see for 90 days, her will still be machmer on, and we will be metamataris. And what happened was the Tanya Maisa also Rebbe Krabbalozer. What happened was a woman had touched Tyrus, and then a couple of hours later she was Pirsanida, and she asked Rebbe, am I allowed to use these tires, or are they ruined because they're tummy? And he said, you haven't seen them for 90 days. This is Torah. You can eat the tires. Lachash and Nisker, after Rebbe Chap, that Rabbi Lozer, who's a Yochid, Keneged a Rabbim, Amar said, really, I made a mistake. I should have asked these tires. But Nunu, Kedayu Rabbi Lozer, Lismach Halav B'Shasatcha. It was a time of hunger, according to Rashi, and therefore he didn't want to pass him food that easily, even though it was tires. And therefore he said, "No, nishkaperlich." I was showing on Rabbi Lozer. Rabbi Lozer has great places, and he would have held that she would not be tamei. So I passed him like him, nishkaperlich. So, what does it mean? My la'achish nisker. After Rebbe remembered that he did something wrong, what did he remember? If he remembered that there was an actual resolution to the shaila, and it was accepted by the public, by the poiskim, that we pass like Rabbanon, well then he should have had to read verses psak, and he should have had to say that this tires is not tamei, and you have to burn it. He can't go rogue and paskin against what the psak halacha was. Ella, this was a shaila that remained unresolved. And we know there's a machlokes in the Mishnah as to whether or not a woman who doesn't see dam for 90 days is tamei or not lamafreya, but there was no resolution to the shaila. And he passed like Rebbe Lozer, not against an accepted psak. He just passed like Rebbe Lozer on his own. After he realized that Rabbi Eliezer has opposition, but his opposition far outnumbered him, and then he realized he should have passed like the rabbim. Omar, he said, "Kedayu Rabbi Eliezer, listen mechalov b'shasatcha." So you see from here that even though you would be makel by a derbanan, because the tumas and nida of lemafreya is also a derbanan, she only became tummy now. We're saying the Irish that she touched prior to this is also tummy. That's a derbanan, and you see by a derbanan, you do take into account that if it's a yochid neged a rabbim, you would not be makel like the yochid. You would be machmir like the rabbi. And therefore, it's logical that Rabbi Shua ben Levi had to speak out, halacha, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, because since Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri is disputed by the rabbim, Rabbi Shua ben Levi felt necessary to point out that in here, the halacha is like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. Amar Rabbi Mishar Rabbi. Rabbi Mishar said Rabbi. So Rabbi is the one who said that there shouldn't be a difference if you pass in the kula by a drabanan. It shouldn't make a difference if it's a yochid neged a rabbim or not. So Amar Rabbi Mishar Rabbi. So this is the same kasha as the Abaya asked before, but now someone else is asking. Nachman Yitzchak might be asking. Pshash is asking again. He's trying to prove that by a derbanan it makes a very big difference. If a rabbin is arguing with a yochid, the norm is to pass him like the rabbin. But Tanya we learned Shmuel Kroiva. If someone finds out right after one of their Zayin Kroivim pass away, then they have Shiva and Shloshim. Then they have the lachas of Shiva and Shloshim. You know how to take haircuts, and you know how to take a shower. So you Shiva, and you know how to take haircuts for 30 days. But Rechoika, but what if someone didn't hear right away? And we'll soon see how that's defined. They only have to fear Avelis one day. What's called hearing about it right away and not hearing about it right away? Besides Shloshim, if one hears about the death of a loved one, one of the Shnayim Kroivim, within 30 days of the passing, then it's Kroiva. And then they have to follow all the halachas of Shiva and of Shloshim. But lachish shloshim, if they only found that after shloshim, rechaita, and therefore they would only keep avelis for one day. Divi Rabbi Kiva. This is the svar of Rabbi Kiva. The chachamim oimim acha shmur kroiva, acha shmur rechaita, no hegesh shivu shloshim. So let's stop here for a second. Here we have a machlokes in the Derabanan. Rabbi Kiva is a yachid who's being mekel and saying that a shmur rechaita you only have to keep one day. And the Rabbanan are arguing l'chumra and saying even by a shmur rechaita you have to keep the full shiva and the full shloshim. The Amar Rabbi Bachana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Bachana commented on this in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Whenever you find a yachid being mekel, such as Rabbi Kiva over here, the Rabbi Machmirim and the Chachamim arguing, halacha kedivrei hamachmirim hamarubim, you always follow the machmirim that are the roiv, chutz mizu, except for this case by avelos, she'al papi Rabbi Kiva mekel, even though Rabbi Kiva was being mekel is the yachid. The Chachamim machmirim and the people who are machmir are the roiv. Nevertheless, halacha kedivrei Rabbi Kiva, we pass on like Rabbi Kiva. So you see from here that by avelos, where there's a special kula, like we learned from Rabbi Levine, there's a special kula by avelos. There will pass even like a yochid lekula b'makam harabim that are machmer. But normally by the rabbanos, if the rabbim are machmer, you're going to be machmer. So again, it's a refute on what Rabbi said that there shouldn't be a difference. By the rabbanon, if you go lekula, you go lekula across the board. You see that's not so. That's not so. And indeed, even by the rabbanon, when you go lekula, that's only if you don't have a rabbin being machmer neged the yochid who's being naked. Right, and therefore, why did Rabbi Shubin Levi have to speak out special here? Allah Maduri. Once I know you go lekula, so you go lekula. So they're arguing and saying no. Correct. That's what Rabbi was suggesting, and they're proving that no. If it's a yochid, you don't go lekula so fast, and that's why Rabbi Shubin Levi had to specify that Allah is like Rabbi Maduri. We pass like a beginner. And we have by Avelis, we always go look at it. The Soverla, Kishmuel, and he holds like Shmuel. The Amar Shmuel, Halacha Kedivra Mekel Ba'avel. There's a special halacha to pass like a Mekel by Avel. By Avelis, who, the Akilu Barabanon, Avel Ba'alma, but in normal cases, Afilu B'Darabanon, Shani Ben Yochid B'Makam Yochid, Ben Yochid B'Makam Rabbin. And that's why Rabbi Shubin Levi had to specify that halacha that can be the kula. If someone's sleeping when Shabbos comes in, and then he wakes up, Rabbi Yochanan holds the kula that he has 2,000 amos in every direction to his kodesh shvis. Papa is going back to the original shaila again. Why did Rabbi Shubin Levi have to tell us how Rabbi Yochanan Meduri he paskins the kula by erev? He said halacha could never make a be'erev. Why does he have to pass like Rabbi Yochanan Meduri? So there would be a difference between a yachid b'makam yachid and a yachid b'makam rabbin. So just because Rabbi Shubin Levi said that halacha kedivra and mekel the Eruvin, it doesn't mean that it would pass him like Rabbi Yochanan Benuri. Because maybe when he said halacha kedivra and mekel be'eruvin, he meant if it was a yachid connected a yachid or a rabbin connected a rabbin. But maybe if the yachid was being mekel, connected a rabbin was being machmer, like in our case with Rabbi Yochanan Benuri, maybe there Rabbi Shubin Levi's rule doesn't apply. So Rabbi Shubin Levi had to specify my rule applies here as well. Oh, so let me read the words. But by cases other than Avelos, afilu b'derabanan, even if it's an issue derabanan, shani ben yachid b'makam yachid ben yachid b'makam rabbin. Shani is a difference. Okay, for Papa wants to suggest another reason why Rabbi Shubin Levi had to specify that he's passing like a Birchin Benuri, Lakula, even though he already said a general rule that you pass in Lakula when it comes to Eruvin. So Kedai de Chamina, Hani Mili Be'erev Chatzeres. When Rabbi Shubin Levi said that you go Lakula by Erev, you might have thought that's only silence of Erev Chatzeres. But by Erev Tchumen, Emalai. Maybe by Erev Tchumen, Rabbi Shubin Levi doesn't mean to say you're Mekel, and therefore we have to specify that he's passing in Lakula like Rabbi Yochanan Benuri, who's talking about Erev Tchumen. In fact, the Gemara. So therefore, Tzricha, that's why Rabbi Shubin Levi had to specify, in this case of Erev Tchumen, that he passes Lakula like Rabbi Yochanan Benuri, who's a yachid neged Rab. We know Tamer, the Shanilon, in Erev Chatzeres, L'Erev Tchumen. How do you know that there's a difference? Maybe there's no difference. Why would you say that he's only makel by Erev Chatzeres, which is their Rabbanon, and he's not makel by Tchumen, which is their Rabbanon? They're both their Rabbanon. So Gemara Datnan Amr Rabbi Yehuda B'Medvar Mamurim. Where do we say this halacha is B'Erev Tchumen? We only say it by Erev Tchumen. And B'Medvar Mamurim, Rashi says it's talking about the halacha is Zochin la'adam shaloi b'fanav. I'm allowed to include you in your Erev Chatzeres. As a matter of fact, our city of Toronto has an Erev Chatzeres. Did you know? Do you know about it? Do you know where it is? I don't know anything about it. But somebody was zoicha in it for me and for you and for everybody else. The machers, they know where it is. But us riffraff, we're not in the loop. We know it was done for us, right? No one told us about it. The only time you could do that is by Erev Chatzeres. However, by Erev Tchumen, I'm sorry, it's the opposite. Where is there a halacha that you cannot make an error for somebody if he's not aware of it? That's only by Erev Tchumen. But by Erev Chatzeres, you could make an Erev Chatzeres for somebody whether he knows about it or not. Why? You could benefit somebody even though he's not aware of it, but you can't hurt somebody. Why is making an Erev Tchumen hurting somebody? Very simple. Because if I make an Erev Tchumen for you, 2,000 amas to the east, you've now lost your ability to travel 2,000 amas to the west. While Erev Chatzeres, you're losing nothing at all, other than a small piece of food, because they are allowed to take some of your food to use for an Erev Chatzeres, but you're not losing much. But by Erev Tchumen, you might be losing something. I'm sorry? Halachically, not practically. What? Okay. You could still have a fence around your chutzner, right? You still don't have your shotgun, you know. Zok the Gemara. So Tosfos actually points out. So you don't see here that Erev Tchumen is more chumradik. It's from a practical application. It's chum. So Tosfos says, but what I mentioned earlier is that even by Erev Chatzeres, they're also taking from you. Because they're allowed to take some of your food, even though they don't ask you to be part of the Erev Chatzeres. So there's a chavan factor there. Yet there it works and here it doesn't work. So you see there's more of a chumer. And that's why Reb Shimon Levi spoke out, halacha kabech and benuri, because he wanted to indicate that even by Erev Tchumen, I'm going to go look for it. Another reason why Reb Shimon Levi had to specify that he paskins like Rabbi Yochanan and benuri, even though he already said you go look for it. So that I might have thought Hanamili b'shiyur. When did I say my rule of you go l'kula by Erev? That's by shiyur Erev. Aval b'tchiris Erev emalot. What is shiyur Erev? Shiyur Erev means by Erev Chatzeres, where they set up the Erev Chatzeres. They don't make a new one every week. I don't know how often they make it, but it lasts a very long time. So what if the amount of food that was there for the Erev Chatzeres diminished over time? So there's a makom to Memekel to say that even though you don't have enough to have initiated an Erev Chatzeres, you're still allowed to rely on that Erev. But with Chilas Erev, when we're discussing establishing a new Erev, such as here by Erev Tchumen, where when he went to sleep right before Shabbos, we're looking as to whether or not he's establishing a new Erev, there might be more of a chum. So maybe when Rabbi Shimon Levi said you go to Mekel by Erev, is only an Erev that I was already established. And there's a shaila on it, so there will allow it to remain in power. If you're setting up an Erev L'Chila, Emalot. Sorry? What do you mean that's what you're going to say, Shabbos? No, by Erev Chatzeres. That yeah. So we're talking about Shiur Erev, we're referring to Erev Chatzeres. Because like you said, Erev Tchumen, what have you done for me lately? Every week would be a new thing, exactly right. So Duli spoke out very important, Shiur Erev applies to Erev Chatzeres, because there is something where you would have made it already. So that's correct. Okay. Uminat Tamer the Shanilon, then Shiur Erev Tchilas Erev. How do I know that there's a difference, at least by Erev Chatzeres, between the first week and the following weeks where the Erev Chetzeres had already been set up. Titnan, Omer Yosy, Bamed Devar Mamurim B'Tchilas Erev. When do we say that there's specific shiurim of how much food has to be set out, and how much is that? Rashi tells us, Bamed Devar Mamurim B'Tzorach Shiur L'Erev Chetzeres. How much do you need? A Muslim shtei sudos ben kulam. Either you need to have Muslim based sudos, or you need at least the sheer groigris for everybody who is contributing to the seder. So basically, you need the lesser of the two. If you have a huge item, you just need Muslim based sudos. But if you have very few people, you can get away with less with a groigris for each person. So where are there minimum requirements to set up a neighborhood seder? That's when you're first setting it up. If next Shabbos someone ate part of the Erev and you don't have now enough to make those two minimum thresholds, afilu kol shehu, the Erev Chetzeres will remain intact and it will still work even if there's just a kol shehu food left. I'm sorry? I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure about that. V'loy amru l'Erev Chetzeres ela kadei shelo lishkach teres Eruvin latinokos. Really, for Erev Chetzeres, there was no minimum amount of food at all. Really, there is no minimum. The only place that there's really a minimum amount of food required is Erev Tchumen. But Erev Tchumen, you have to put down Muslim based sudos. There really is no requirement at all to have any specific amount of food for Erev Chetzeres, even when you're setting it up like a tchila. The only reason why Chazal mandated is because people would get mixed up, and if they wouldn't use Muslim based sudos for Erev Chetzeres, they might not do the Erev Tchumen properly. So it was only Kadesh Lishka, so the young children who don't understand what's going on should not think that you don't need anything for any Eruvin. I'll read Rashi. This is Rashi with a little bit of flavor provided by the Marshal. The main Erev where they require a minimum amount of food is really only by Erev Tchumen. So you see there's a difference between Tchilas Erev and Shiur Erev. And therefore it makes sense to say that Rabbi Shua ben Levi wanted to speak out that Allah is like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, even though we're setting up in the Erev Tchumen L'Chatchila, we're still making like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, and we say that he's Kavei and Mokum for Shabbos, even though he was sleeping every time. Where will it be more coming from the area? Right. Well, there's no machlokes about that. Everybody agrees for Erev Tchumen, you have to have Muslim besudas. He said halacha to Mekel. So the question is, why did he then say halacha to Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri? Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri is a Mekel. So why do you have to specify in this case that we pass? The reason is because you would have thought that when did Rabbi Shua ben Levi create a kula and say you're always Mekel by oval? That's b'shiur erev. If you're discussing an issue of Erev Chetzeres by shiur erev, but if you're discussing establishing an Erev Chetzeres, maybe he would be machmer both by Erev Chetzeres and by Erev Tchumen. So Mashmalan, at least in this case, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, he was Mekel like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri to set up this new Erev. Okay, so now we're finished with Eruvin. We're done with Eruvin, and being that we had a whole sugya about people saying that Allah is like this guy, Allah is like that guy, and there's generalizations, the Gemara discusses a series of generalizations. If Yaakov Reb Zeker Amru, if Yaakov Reb Zeker said, Halacha Rabbi Kiva mechaveri. Whenever Rabbi Kiva is arguing with a yochid, we pass him like Rabbi Kiva. But when Rabbi Kiva passes with a rabbin, we don't pass him like it. That was rule number one that was stated. Rule number two, Rabbi Yosy mechaveri. Rabbi Yosy, we would trust him so much that when he passed in something, we passed in like him, even if he's arguing with a rabbin. Rule number two. Rule number three, Rebbe mechaveri. Rebbe is like Rabbi Kiva. If he's arguing with one person, we'll pass him like him. If he's arguing with a rabbin, we're not passing like him. Zok the Gemara, L'may hilchasa. And Rashi explains what it means to ask is, are they actually saying a generalization that I can take to the bank? And anytime I ever encounter a machlokes between Rabbi Yosy and anybody else, I can always pass them like in blindly without asking any questions. Is that what you're saying? I'm sorry. Very good. Very good. Sense is making, right? The other side is they just made an observation from what they've seen, but they're not telling you that this rule can be taken to the bank. You still have to judge each case individually. They're just making an observation. It seems to be generally that we pass on like a basic. And that was the shayla. Rabasi Amar Halom. Rabasi said, no, this rule that each of these people said, that the B'Zreika said, is you can take it to the bank. You're allowed to paskin based on this rule. Abba Amar Matim. You wouldn't paskin barabim, but a Shabbos Shubah the Rav is not going to announce such a psak. But if someone asks him a personal shayla, the Rav can rely on these general relations to paskin. Let me get there in a second. I'll get to an attempt in a second. Rabbi Yosy B'Chanina Amar Nirin, and Rabbi Yosy just says Nirin, meaning you would not even paskin for a yochid like that. But if you already did it, you wouldn't undo it. Okay, so Chaim is asking if they wouldn't paskin like something barabim, how could they tell someone privately be yochid? Is that what your question is? So Dovi's answer that there's a lot of times if there's a kula and the Rav broadcasts it, it creates a little bit of a zilzal, and then people. Right, so if a Rav would pass in barabim, like Rabbi Yosy L'Kula, we're afraid people will be mizalzul in the halacha. Don't think it's cool with it. I don't know. Based on what my story is, it would only make sense. You're right. I don't know the answer. That's why I said I'll make an attempt at trying to understand it. But your kasha, Chaim says like this. It's not a good attempt, right? It's not a good shot. I hear. It's a good point Chaim is bringing up. It's a very good point. I don't know the answer to that. It's a very good point. If anybody can help me, I'm all ears. Chaim is asking, why is it that you would pass on a private child to somebody like Rabbi Yosy, but you won't pass on like in Barabim? Why not? If that's halacha, pass on like that Barabim. So I tried to convince and say, if it was a psak l'kula, maybe you wouldn't want to say Barabim because it would lead to a zilzul. People would think that you don't take this thing seriously. And Chaim Shli's response was, so that's not a good shot. Halacha vein moirin came. And that's usually by a kula. Is by a kula as well? Yeah, but then you would pass like that in public. We're trying to say a psak that a Rav would not say in public, he would only say in private. Right. I hear. It's interesting, but that's not a Rashi says, but I hear what you're saying. I hear. But Rashi doesn't say anything about kula, but Rashi seems to. Okay, so let's see the Gemara weiter. Zok the Gemara weiter. Kalosh nazeh, similar to this expression, Amar Rabbi Yaakov Idi Amar Rabbi Yechanan. And he said, Rav Meir Rabbi Yehuda, got a whole couple over here. Rav Meir Rabbi Yehuda, Halacha Rabbi Yehuda. So we're playing rock, paper, scissors here. So Rabbi Yehuda trumps Rav Meir. Let's remember that. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yosy, Halacha Rabbi Yosy. So Rabbi Yosy trumps Rabbi Yehuda. So if Rabbi Yosy trumps Rabbi Yehuda, then he says, Chleimer Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yosy, Halacha Rabbi Yosy, for sure Rabbi Yosy trumps Rabbi Meir. Because if Rabbi Yosy trumps Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yehuda trumps Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yosy trumps Rabbi Meir. Hashta, the Makam Rabbi Yehuda Lessa, if Rabbi Meir doesn't have an opinion in the face of Rabbi Yehuda, the Makam Rabbi Yosy Nevoy, Amar Basi. Apani Loimid, I also learned the same thing. Rabbi Yosy, Rabbi Shimon, Halacha Rabbi Yosy. Rabbi Yosy also trumps Rabbi Shimon. But we don't know where Rabbi Shimon falls in respect to Rabbi Yehuda or Rabbi Meir. That's still unknown. Amar Baba Rabbi Yechanan, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, Halacha Rabbi Yehuda. Oh, so now we have Hashem B'Makam Rabbi Yehuda Lessa, So the only question is how about Reb Meir? Reb Meir and Reb Shimon, they're both on the downside. Who trumps who? That's the more take it. We don't know the answer. Amar B'Shasha. Why is it irrelevant? What? What if he doesn't have an opinion on that subject? Right? I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Amar B'Shasha. Less nahu lahana klala. I don't believe any of these rules. I don't believe in all this stuff, right? So Rashi, which one are we talking about? The chalin l'il ploni alach ploni l'chamakayim. Not true. Every case will pass individually. I don't follow rules. Minole the Rabbi Shasha. How does Rabbi Shasha know this concept? Ilay memaha. Even you're going to say he knows of the mirror. It's not Rabbi Shimon Omer. Lama davar daim. This was in our Mishnah. Lama davar daimer. Legimel chatzeres hapsuchas zulazu. Hapsuchas l'shus rabim. You have three chatzeres that are open to each other, open to l'shus rabim. Irvu shtayim achitzonis eminam tzoyes. If either of the outer chatzeres made an air with the center, this is air chatzeres. He mutos imayin vein mutor shima. They're each allowed to carry in each other's places. But ushtayim achitzonis, which never made an air with each other, asura zoom zoom. This was something that Reb Shimon said. Reb Chama bar Goya Amarav, Allah Reb Shimon. He passed like Reb Shimon. Uman Palagalei. Who is the most logical person to say who's arguing on Reb Shimon? Reb Yehuda would be Reb Yehuda. In fact, Gemara, I Amar Reb Yehuda, Reb Shimon, Allah Reb Yehuda. So how could you pass like Reb Shimon over here? Oh, so Rashi has two reasons. Either because normally Reb Yehuda was the bar plukta of Reb Shimon. So whenever we don't know who bar plukta is, we'll blame it on Reb Yehuda. That's one shot. And the other shot is because earlier in the Mishnah, Reb Yehuda said a halacha that you could pick if you want to go 4 amos this way or 4 amos this way, but you can't change your mind. So Reb Yehuda was the Tana who was discussing something before he brought Reb Shimon down. But since you see here that he was passing like Reb Shimon against Reb Yehuda here, less knew. You see from here that he doesn't believe in these rules. What's the raya? Maybe the rules are for when no one came out specifically and passed him like one over the other, you can always assume to pass like a Yehuda. But when someone came out and passed him like a Shimon, the rule doesn't apply there. But maybe everywhere else, if you don't know the halacha, maybe you could pass him like a Yehuda automatically. It's not an ear shel yachad and nasus rabim. You had a year of a yachad. And Rashi touches a year of a yachad is it didn't have 600,000 people in it, so therefore it was never a Rosh Hashanah. So therefore, if it's a Rosh Hashanah, you don't need an Eruvin. The Nasus Rabbim, but it became a bigger city. So the Loch is Ma'arvin Eskula. You're allowed to make an Erev around the whole city. But Shal Rabbim v'Nasus Shal Yochid, if it was once a public city which needed small Eruvin in different neighborhoods, and then the city became smaller, and then it wouldn't need an Erev anymore, Ein Ma'arvin Eskula, then you're not allowed to make one big Erev for the whole city. Even though normally an Erev Yochid, you could make one Erev for the whole city, but since this started off as a Ir Shal Rabbim, we don't want to allow you to now treat it like a Ir Shal Yochid, because people are going to forget that it's something called Eruvin. Ella im kein oisach chutzala ki ir chadasha shabyuda sheish b'chamishim diyurim. Unless you make a new neighborhood that will not be included in the Eruv, so that it'll be clear that there's Eruvin only in a part of the city, not in the whole city, because in a big city you wouldn't be able to. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. That's why in every community there's Eruv, you need someone attacking the Eruv. So people should remember there's an Eruv. Reb Shimon says you don't need to have 50 inhabitants. It's enough that you have sholosh chaser shnei batim. So again, you have a machlokes between Reb Shimon and Reb Yehuda about how big of a neighborhood has to be built that's going to be excluded from the area. Reb Chama bar Goya Amarav halacha Reb Shimon uman palagal Reb Yehuda. I v'Omer Reb Yehuda Reb Shimon halacha Reb Yehuda. So Gemara, the same answer we said before. My question, this whole rule of halachic Rabbi Yehuda is only if no one ever expressed or clarified who we pass like. You can rest assured you can pass like Rabbi Yehuda. But any other place where it was discussed and the psak was made contrary to Rabbi Yehuda, that's not going to be a kasha. So tomorrow, maybe we could bring a raya. And again, what are we looking for a raya for? We're looking for a raya that you don't say a general rule halachic Rabbi Yehuda. What if you live in a city, which means you have to be part of the Erev Chatzeres, otherwise you usher everybody in the city. And you did not contribute to the Erev Chatzeres. So you mess up the Erev. But you moved out of the city. So the halach is Echad Nachi V'Echad Yisrael, Oyser L'vnei Chatzeres. You're ushering the whole city. Because even though you're physically not present, but it's still your property, and you still consider it your property, and you're still connected to it, and therefore, since you didn't contribute to the Erev Chatzeres, the entire city is also to carry. That's right. Very good. It's very good. Divrei of Meir. Divrei of Meir. Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Rabbi Yehuda says, Eina Oser. He wouldn't answer. Rabbi Yehuda holds he wouldn't answer. Because since he's not in the city, he doesn't really consider himself part of it. He does not part of it. Rabbi Yosy Omer, it depends. Nachri Oser. Anachi is Oser. You know why? Because Anachi can get back there on Shabbos. He can travel. Yisrael Ein Oser. If they should ain't derech Yisrael lo b'Shabbos. If a Yid went to a different city for Shabbos, he's not coming back. He's not coming back on Shabbos. Rabbi Shimon Omer, afilu niachas beisai, balach lishbos etzol bitei ba'isai ir. Even if he didn't leave the city, he just went to his daughter's house for Shabbos in the same city. He's still masiach tas from his house. Eino yosher shekvar yasiach taitoi. If he's by his daughter's house, he knows he probably won't get thrown out, so he knows he can stay there a whole Shabbos. We're going to see that when we learn the Mishnah there, that's what it is. He knows if he's by his daughter, he's safe. He won't get thrown out. No. I learned the Mishnah, so the Rav speaks about it. Yeah. I mean, I don't have the clarity on when we'll get there, but it was based on the fact that he knows he can park there for a while. He's not getting thrown out. And Reb Chama bar Goya passed like Reb Shimon. Uman Palagalain, who's arguing on him? It's Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yosy. Rabbi Yehuda, Reb Shimon, halacha Rabbi Yehuda. So from my coach, the same teretz. Again, we're only saying you can pass him like him if no one passes otherwise. If someone passes other, it doesn't apply. We'll try another one. It's done. This is what we meant, that an ani does not make an erev a tchumen with bread. He makes it by being there. We're saying for carrot. Only an ani is ma'ar b'raglav. You know why? Because he doesn't have money to send food with a shliach. Both an ani and an usher could make it b'raglav or with food. The only reason why we say you could be ma'ar b'pas is not to be machmer, it's to be mekel. So saying that you ma'ar b'raglav is not a chumrah. It's just saying if you don't have food, you're ma'ar b'raglav. But avada, everybody holds that you're allowed to be ma'ar b'pas. So he shouldn't have to go out by himself. So here it's a different case. Here Rav paskin like Rav Yehuda. Till now we were asking some kashas where someone paskin like Rav Shimon. Here we're asking a kasha someone paskin like Rav Yehuda. And you can ask Tarta Lamali. If we already said that normally you always paskin like Rav Yehuda, why in this case did Rav have to specify that the halach is like Rav Yehuda? We already have a rule that you always paskin like Rav Yehuda. How much of Meir Rav Yehuda, halach Rav Yehuda? That's my question. What do you ask me, kasha? Dilma Rav less than Hanik Loli. Rav doesn't know little problem. Rav had to pass like a Yehuda, but Avad Reb Zreika would not have had to pass like a Yehuda because he has the cloud. Okay, let's stop over here because we have 2 minutes left to slichus. All right, so we'll have a chance to read it. Let's read this. Shkoyach. I'm happy we got a little bit ahead. We got almost halfway through the first time. I'm always panicking when we fall behind.